All right. The way I would like to do this today is maybe just to give a relatively short presentation. There's actually no slides besides the one right behind me, and to try to have a little bit more of an active discussion afterwards around, what kind of funding needs you guys might have, where, I can give advice directly. I think that makes a little bit more sense to drive this into a more proactive, discussion at the end. But to outline this today a little bit, as it says in the title, this is finding the right method of funding. This is not about finding funding in general and how to find funding, but it's about how to find the right method of funding. My name is Max. I'm one of the managing partners of OneUp Capital. I have a typical finance background, used to work in investment banking, done a lot of VC for many, many years, and we now have an alternative asset fund basically that invest predominantly into indie studios and into publishers, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Now, when it's about how to find the right method of funding, I think it starts with the mindset, right? So you have to really think about, first of all, who here is a developer actually? All right, that's a good start, because that's the people I want to talk to today, right? So it starts kind of with your mindset, right? You want to figure out, do I want to publish? Or do you want to go to a publisher, or do you want to self-publish, right? And this is like the very, very first beginning. And what I mean by mindset is, do you want to go ahead and develop purely a game, or do you want to go ahead and build a company? And I think this is something you need to be extremely clear about, right? It's not an easy decision to make, because not everyone, there's amazing people out there made to build a fantastic game, but not everyone is made to build a company. Those are two very different things, and they have to be looked at very differently. So what we're not going to do today is talk about publishing and different publishers out there, but we're talking about the self-publishing route, right? So we're going to look at 4 different ways of self-publishing your game, right? So we're going to talk about the very classical route, banks. We're going to talk about venture capital. We're going to talk about accelerators, grants, government programs, and so on. And we're going to talk about alternative asset funds. So we're going to have 4 different things we're going to look at if you want to go ahead and self-publish your games. Trying to find a few pros and cons, and then discuss those together a little bit. See what needs you might guys have around those. Starting with banks, it's the most obvious one. I need money. Where to go to? Traditionally, I go to a bank. But banks, it's not that easy. If you just started launching a game, for example, you go to a bank teller and say, look at my KPIs, this is my customer acquisition cost. The woman behind the teller probably looks at you as if you were an alien, right? So it's not that you can come with her with your metrics and say, look what I've done, this is great work, look at the first build I've done. So even if you convince them to then not get a loan, which is traditionally what the bank would do for your game, but for your company, then it's a two-sided sword. On the one hand, it goes really fast, right? So you can get money, access to money very quickly, but the cost of capital nowadays is quite expensive, right? So access to money is there. It's relatively fast in that sense, but the downside obviously is personal liability, right? So that is one of the things that you have to consider. It's debt, right? But then again, there's countries, and it depends where you guys are from, that make it very easy, right? Sweden, some countries in the Nordics, they have bank programs specifically made for the development industry, right? So it's definitely something worth checking out. Other countries like Germany, they're quite slow, right? Banks are still not in that digital age yet, most of them at least, right? So you're still stuck with someone who's not understanding your business model. So moving forward into what could be next and where to get money is obviously venture capital. Right, venture capital for gaming is an interesting route, but then again, right, we're going back to what I said at the very beginning. Most venture capitalists are looking at your company and not just purely at your game. They want to see what you're capable of building and what they're investing in, right? So one thing that you have to consider here a little bit is the downside of giving too much equity away and what stage you're in. The cost of capital, again, is a bit more expensive than it used to be. The capital markets have changed in general. Even for VCs to raise money is becoming harder. So it's obviously a market that have changed quite a bit. One thing maybe as a little bit of a piece of advice at this stage is you have to also think about who do you want to have on your board. VCs tend, or especially solo GPs, so venture capital funds that just exist out of one person, they usually tend to want to have a board seat. They want to sit in your board, they want to have Friday KPI calls, and I've been there. It can be painful when you have to justify every ducking metric every Friday to someone else, and it's just, that can be a hassle. So There's a workaround in that sense, which is more overlooked, especially in the gaming industry, which is family offices, right? Family offices, I would like to describe always as being a bit more of a lighter VC, if that makes sense, right? They tend to be taking a back seat rather than being on the board at the front of your table, trying to get every KPI out of you on every Friday afternoon, right? So in that sense, maybe this is like an alternative route to look at, especially when you're considering, I'm willing to give away equity, I actually want to self-publish, I want to build a company out of there, but I need a substantial amount of money to do so, right? So keep family offices in mind besides venture capital. Now, we've basically covered the fundamentals of what a bank does. I mean, you guys are all aware of that, the venture capital part. We're now looking into the next one, which would be government grants. We're looking into, accelerator programs and so on. This is a fantastic way of, keeping everything, right? In Germany, we have a saying, a gifted horse, you don't look in its mouth, right? Because the government basically would give you a grant, you would be willing to, you don't have to give anything away for that. Besides, obviously some of your time, because filling out those documents for any of those government programs is pain, right? It's such a hassle to go through that. But at the end of the day, it's quite worth it because what you're getting for it is free money, right? So I really urge anyone to look into your specific countries, sub-regions, wherever you guys are based, to see what kind of programs of funding you can find there. There's European funds, there's German funds, there's funds on very small city levels. The city of Hamburg, for example, has now a program called Game City Hamburg, which is massive, and it invests every year into 5 to 6 different startups, 6 figures each, into starting your first own game. This is not money that you're being given in the same way you have to go through a publisher pitch. You just have an idea, you want to build something. So it's a very, very early stage, especially if you're building your first game. This is something that I would really consider at this stage, at least to get some traction, to get your first build, to get something that is more than just a pitch deck, right? Which we can also talk about a little bit later. The downside with this is, this obviously has become quite popular, so you competing not just with small indie studios. In Germany at least, you also have large corporations that can take money from those government funds. So a small indie would compete with a Ubisoft for the same pot of money basically that they're trying to grab money from. That's, for example, the issue in Germany. We have a German big fund of money, the German Games Fund, but that's empty now because very large corporations have been feeding from it as well, which sucks for anyone who obviously is trying to make a living out of it, right? So that's basically the third bracket I wanted to bring up, and would love to keep in mind, guys, I want to bring this up into a bit of a discussion point afterwards. What could make sense most? What are the downs, the pros and cons here? The last one is a bit of something where we ourselves sit in. This is obviously everything that's surrounding alternative asset funds, right? Project-based financing, if that makes sense, or revenue-based financing models. Besides venture capital, where you give away equity, you can think about a lending-based model as well, something that is based on the debt capital model of it. Instead of giving away equity at this stage, you can think about, okay, if I raise money, can I give away future revenue, for example, right? Similar what you would do in a publisher, but without having anyone trying to steer what you're doing, giving you the creative freedom still that you want to have when you self-publish something, right? So it kind of gives you the financial uptake of what some of the publishers would do without, the downside of, restricting creative freedom, if that makes sense. What that would do basically is, let's take the user acquisition let's take user acquisition as an example. It would help you to scale. So maybe, if you're at the stage where you're at a very early beginning, or in a very, very early developing stage, that might become a bit tricky to fulfill at that stage. But once you are at a stage where you say, okay, I want to go from a few hundred or a few thousand a month to 5 or 6 digits, then alternative asset funds is basically what's very interesting to look at user acquisition funding. Seeing, can I borrow basically $1 to make $10 out of it? And if that equation makes sense, then go for it. The equation behind it, is very simple. All that you look at is my cost of capital that I'm being charged monthly, is that lower than my growth rate? And if that's the case, then you should go for it, right? That's the only mathematical equation you have to look at. Is my growth rate higher than what I'm being charged on the cost of capital structure on a monthly basis? Yes. If so, great, go for it, right? So in conclusion, going back to the very first thing that I said, it's all about mindset, right? We're trying to figure out which route we're going in the very, very beginning. Do I want to go to a publisher, stay true to being 100% developer? Fine, why not, right? You can focus on publishing all day long, marketing, finance, everything can be taken away from you and it's being done, right? That has a lot of upside. I completely get it. But then again, why not self-publishing? You're opening a whole Pandora box, obviously, but on the other hand, it comes with a lot of freedom as well, right? So in that sense, when you decide you have that kind of mindset, you have at least those 4 different ways of funding your game. The question is, and that's obviously something I can't answer in today's presentation, but we can talk about it now, is which one's the right one for you and why? And if none of those make sense, at what stage are you in right now, and how can we make it work? So guys, I know this was a quick, and I talk quite quickly, I admit that, yeah. This was a quick, intro in that sense, because it's not really a presentation, into different ways of funding a game. Maybe if you guys have some time now, it would be great to see what kind of questions you have about a specific one: banks, venture capital, family offices, user-based acquisition financing, alternative asset funds, anything that's out there, so that I can help you a little bit with the industry knowledge that we've gained over the last years to feedback a little bit into this. So I hope there's some questions around this. Feel free to shoot so that we can focus a little bit more on what you guys have in your hats and thoughts, and hopefully you can answer those. Thanks. Do we have a mic to give around? Do we have questions? I hope so, because I made this very short, so you guys have to talk now. You have one? Thank you.
Hi again, Max. Could you please more on, is my cost of capital lower than what's my growth rate?
Yes. So what I mean by this is basically, let's take for an example, you want to finance your user acquisition, right? And you're thinking about getting a loan on that, or like a multiple. So let's say you make $5,000 in revenue each month already, and now a company like ours, for example, another company would offer you to give you 15,000 each month. But we would charge you, let's say, 3% for that. If your growth rate in the month or in the past month, the average growth rate is lower than what you would be charged, don't do it. If your growth rate is actually higher than what you're being charged, then mathematically it makes sense, because you would make more money. Your company would grow even quicker. It would basically accelerate the growth rate. It's an acceleration process of your growth. And that's the equation behind it, basically. So it's as simple as that. Thanks. Yeah.
Hey there, sorry, this is probably like an MBA 101 question, so apologies on this, but...
Oh, I don't have an MBA.
For those companies that don't have access to a loan oftentimes, so at a high level, without walking us through the formula and the mathematics, how do you compare cost of capital on equity? Because that's where a lot of startups are looking at, is you have a pool of equity that you could spend on UA. Maybe you can tap into that pool further, and you don't maybe have access yet to loans or whatever, which is why OneUp and other companies exist too. So how do we look at cost of capital on that side of things as equity?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I don't want to give you a mathematical answer to that, but I rather want to say that equity is always more expensive than debt. Okay, so that's the 101 answer for an MBA level, right? So your equity is more expensive because, and now we come to the more elaborated version of it, because you have to give away more, right? So you give away a share of your company, which hopefully in the future, when you look at it, is going to be more worth, right? So in the long run, it's going to be more expensive for you to give away equity than to basically take on debt. So it's obviously like a difficult question, should I now go out? So Max, what should I do? Should I raise money, which is more expensive, as you're telling us right now, or should I actually take on a loan, which you say is cheaper, even given the current market circumstances, which make it quite expensive to take a loan, but it still applies, right? The question is, again, it depends on the situation that you're in a little bit, because getting a loan on something that is nothing is obviously always a bit tricky. Getting a loan on something where something already exists, like for example revenue, which is quite important and makes it a lot easier, can help a lot to justify it to a bank that has no idea about gaming. Because as I said at the beginning, if you show them your cost per install, your daily average revenue per active user, whatever it is, you know, all your fancy metrics, they don't give a shit. Because at the end of the day, sorry for my French, but like they basically look at your revenue, at your profit margins and so on. And those you mostly don't have at the very beginning, right? You don't have 2 years of P&L, which is a profit and loss statement, that you can show to a bank, right? So in that sense, if this is all nothing that you can basically put up front in someone like this, then the equity route, even though it's the more expensive one, is probably the right one to go down to. Sorry, I hope that answered it a little bit. I went a bit further than that, but I hope that's all right. Yeah.
Equity route. Do you have any thoughts on the difference between profit sharing of a project? Like, let's say you're building a game which takes 3 years, and then.
Do you want to say it again to the?
Sorry. So, can you share your thoughts on if you want to share profit of a game versus equity of the company? So, let's say you're building a game, it's going to take 3 years, and you're giving away equity basically. What is the like the ups and downs, the pros and cons of giving away profit sharing for a specific project, meaning a game, or of equity of your company?
Are you, when you say profit, you also talk about revenue in general?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, right. I mean, the model that you're describing is kind of like walking a bit towards like what the original traditional publisher model is, right? So I'm going to a publisher, you know, he gets his rev share from what I'm earning, and that obviously is a great route when you consider that you are not losing any equity, any stakes in the company. I don't have anyone on the board seat. Issue with that is if it goes really, really big, you're losing quite a big chunk of money, especially if it's on the revenue side, right? Because if you think about it, it's a huge funnel, revenue is on top, profit is a very small thing on the bottom, and if you have to give away something from the very big top, from the upper funnel, then there's even less there down at the end, right? So the question kind of like, is my model really, really scalable? Then maybe like the equity model makes more sense. And I get it, it's like looking into like a glass thing. At 5 p.m. today, we have a panel talk about how does future game investment look like in 10 years. And we've all been laughing a little bit about it because 10 years from now, how do we know it? How do I know what my game is looking like in 10 years? Does it even exist? Is it going to make 100 billion? I don't know, right? But how do we kind of like, you know, take the first step and the first approach to it? Again, I think the answer comes to something very simple. What is the mindset, right? Who do I want to have working with me on this? Do I want to have some, you know, VC who like asks me my KPI things every Friday, but gives me access to a huge network, right? Is that worth the opportunity cost, right? So the opportunity cost is always what you have to look at the end of the day. I get something, what do I have to give away from that? And then you weigh up those two opportunities. And if one thing fits yourself better, then go for that one. And that's a very simple answer, really. But it doesn't fit, because there's no shoe that fits all, if that makes sense. Yeah. I hope it was a bit of a vague answer, but I hope it was right.
That was a good answer, actually.
Okay, yeah. All right. Any other questions, guys? Especially to the developers. Are you all funded and done already?
No.
So what are you looking for? What do you need?
5 million.
Okay, in what? You want to raise 5 million?
I want 5 million.
You want 5 million? Okay, how do you justify that?
Making already money, I have 4 million years.
Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Oh, sorry, I think.
Oh, sorry.
But we get back to you. No. Now you get the mic.
I get the mic. I run 2 gaming studios.
Okay.
And I want to build out now a publishing company. So I'm already spending a few millions on user acquisition to these companies. I have full funding from publishers in them, but too many games that are good games that are not getting published because they're not going to make 100K a day.
When you started with that and you had cash flow issues for the very first time in your career, and how did you decide what route to go? To build yourself, to find a publisher, to go to a bank? What made you decide the way you worked at the end?
So in the beginning, we self-funded everything for 2 years. We lost around 50,000 euro because we didn't receive sellers, and the game was signed by publisher who made us 0 money. They technically killed the game because they were relying on App Store feature back in 2016.
Wow.
And then I contacted 40 publishers. One of them was Voodoo. So we started working for free with Voodoo initially. And after 3 months, they offered us paper prototype deal. So they funded us about 6 months, and our 11th game was a hit game. And then we got yearly contracts. We kept working and working and working. So for 7 years now, we built around 200 prototypes. We worked with Voodoo, Homa, Supersonic, AppLove in Azure, Coda Games. So
And all that despite one publisher almost sinking your business into the ground.
Yeah, so I worked with almost all the publishers, but back in 2020, Voodoo returned our first game. They returned the game back to us. And I started self-publishing with like $5,000 a month, and then we scaled it to around 150K a month user acquisition. We are still pushing, and we were able to monetize the game. The publisher was not, they could have continued publishing, but it would be small scale. It's not interesting for them. So we were lucky to build additional 8 hit games, which are generating revenue, and then we use that revenue to fund this. But now what I want to do is build out a self-publishing company that's going to take all the IPs that we have and push them higher, but I need much larger capital.
That sounds amazing. First of all, congratulations to the success, and I think thank you very much for sharing your story here. I feel a bit like a motivational speaker that like picks up people randomly for the audience. But I mean, that's what I meant earlier with like having a bit of a discussion rather than just a monologue here all day. I think what this basically shows is that, even going to the publishing route is not like, the end of your story, of your company, of your game, right? Exactly the opposite. I mean, what you just demonstrated is it can open up a whole new level of doors, right? So again,
you have to make some money to be self-sustainable, but publishers definitely provide you ability to continue working on games. And even if you go in a deal that's not really good for you in the beginning, it's still cash flow. So without cash flow, you're in a problem, but you have to think about monetizing. And the important thing is you learn what they do so you can replicate for yourself.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is something extremely important as a key takeaway from all of this, and that's cash flow, right? I mean, cash flow is something that not everyone wants to always think about, but it's everything is based on that, essentially. Your company, your server costs, whatever you have, right? And monitoring that and making sure how can I basically get the most out of that part. Not about the revenue always, it's about your cash flow, because that's what will be able to keep the lights on for the next week, that's what cash flow does. That's not what revenue does, that's what cash flow does. And that's the very important thing. So thanks for bringing it up. It's a very, very important point.
One of my investors in the past said a little bit of money solves a lot of problems. And the biggest problem that many developers have, they think about making the game, but that's not the game here. It's how I make money, and then I think about the game.
Yeah, you have to think about the company as well. Thank you so much. Do you guys have any other questions? Now everyone's very shy because of your story here. Nah, there's someone else.
I bankrupted in 2016.
And you made it back up. Respect that.
Right, so I'm new to this whole process. I'm at the very beginning of the journey. I've been doing it for about a year. I got the local funding. That worked out well, and it was a lot of paperwork, by the way. I'll share with anybody that wants to get some help with that. My question is, that's quite long. I am now talking to some VCs, and they're looking for 2 specific profiles that I can't really offer. And I just wanted to know how widespread this is. One is that they're looking for a co-founder, and I'm open to that, but it's not something I want to rush because it's very important to the life of the company. And the other one is they have problems with me being incorporated and based in Germany. And I was just curious if you had any idea why that is. I'm going to ask them too as well, but I'm just...
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's actually, so first question was, a lot of them are asking for or looking for a co-founder. Are you a developer? Okay, so that is the problem. you're a developer. I'm so sorry, man. No, but this is the thing, you know, venture capitalists often have this stigma, this negative stigma that a developer is a developer. He has that mindset of developing games. He's the creative heart of the company. But can that same person actually run a company? He can make a game. You can make a game, but can you also make a company? And that's the question that they're asking for. Because with then building the company comes marketing, HR, regulations at some point, you know, any governance. The list is quite long, right? Finance, right? Like making sure that everything is that everything is cash flow positive at some point. And that's why they're asking for a co-founder, someone who understands or has a commercial mindset, right? You bring the creative, like you bring the intellectual capacity for developing something, but they're looking also for someone who can deliver on the rest, right? And I've seen this quite a lot, that is like, you know, it's kind of like when you look into the startup ecosystem in general, you have someone who's a CTO, who's kind of like your dev, your heart, everything, the creative mindset, and then you have someone who runs the commercial side of the business, and that's the same equivalence to it, right? The other question you ask is, hopefully that answers the first part. Then the other question you had was based on why incorporating in Germany. Are you German? Okay, where are you from? And do you live in Germany? All right. They probably prefer an LLC model and hope because you have... do you still hold a US citizenship? Yeah, they probably have the hopes that you, because of your US citizenship, can create an LLC which has less restrictions in terms of corporate policies and regulations than a German GmbH would have. The keyword is Haftung and so on. Like it's the German legal system is much more difficult when it comes to taxation and so on than like an LLC model would be that you set up, you know, south of New York City. So in that sense, that's why they probably asked that question, why not setting it up in the US? The other thing is, what you should probably also think about is that the US ecosystem allows for much larger rounds to be raised than, you know, a German one. So if you're looking for seed funding of $1 million in Europe, that's probably, you know, a benchmark figure that sounds about right. The same number in the US would be around 3 to 5 million, right? So there's a different scale over there. So for the next round, which they're looking at, because a venture capital fund always looks at what's next. They don't care about so much that you have another partner in your seed round. They want to see what the Series A looks like, what the exit eventually looks like. They want to, like, you know, make more out of their investment, if that makes sense. So seeing that there's a higher likelihood of a higher multiple aboard is probably one of another reasons for it. It's not because of Germany itself, it's just because it's a bit different over there.
Have you heard about Stripe Atlas? Stripe Atlas. No. Stripe Atlas is part of Stripe payment company that allows you to incorporate in US Delaware within 15 minutes. Wow. So I have two companies there, $500, that's it. You fill in you literally in 5 minutes can open company now. And they do all the legal stuff, taxing, agent, everything.
Thank you. Delaware company, anyone here can sort you. Any other questions? You guys are all good? There is time for a break then, right? Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. And